Did you know that studies show over 158 million people worldwide are trapped in a toxic relationship right now? Many without even realizing it. Behind closed doors, in marriages, friendships, even workplaces, energy is being stolen in silence. And when we look closer, one of the biggest culprits is the narcissist, the manipulator who builds a toxic couple dynamic where you give, and they only take. Psychologists have discovered something terrifying. Being with a perverse narcissique, a toxic manipulator, triggers the same pain pathways in your brain as physical injury. That's why after just one conversation, you feel exhausted, confused, even broken, as if someone reached inside you and drained your very life force. This is not love. This is not passion. This is a toxic relationship. And every day you stay, your energy leaks away in ways you can't see until it's too late. But here's the truth no one tells you. You are not weak. You are not crazy. Your brain is wired to get hooked on these cycles of reward and punishment. That's why so many people, even intelligent, strong people, fall into the trap of the toxic couple. And that's why breaking free requires more than just willpower. It requires awareness, strategy, and a shift so deep it rewires the way you see yourself. If what I'm saying resonates with you, even a little, then make me a promise. Don't just listen in silence. Give me a sign. Hit the like button, share this video, drop a simple thank you in the comments, or subscribe right now. Because that single action doesn't just help this message spread, it helps you commit to your own transformation. And what you'll hear next could be the very key to stop giving your energy away forever. When Carl Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, he hinted at a truth most of us ignore. Our energy leaks not because others take it, but because we fail to guard it. Seneca warned 2,000 years ago that we are not short on time, we are short on focus, because we give away pieces of ourselves to trivial things and to people who don't deserve them. And today, modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics and depth psychologists suspected. Our brain has a limited supply of attentional and emotional energy, and once it's drained, our capacity for resilience, decision-making, and even self-worth collapses. Studies from the American Psychological Association show that people exposed daily to toxic relationships report a 23% decrease in working memory and cognitive flexibility. That means the very act of dealing with a manipulative partner, boss, or so-called friend isn't just emotionally draining. It literally reduces your brain's ability to think clearly. Freud once described this as the economy of psychic energy. The unconscious constantly negotiates what it spends energy on, and when we are caught in cycles of conflict with narcissists, that economy goes bankrupt. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you feel exhausted, resentful, or strangely empty after certain interactions, it is not just in your head. MRI studies at Stanford have shown that social rejection and emotional manipulation activate the same neural pathways as physical pain. This is why one conversation with a narcissist can feel like you've been hit by a truck. The body registers it as real injury. You are bleeding energy in ways you don't even see. The ancient Stoics would call this a failure to guard the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you let someone constantly manipulate your attention, twist your sense of reality, or drag you into endless justifications, your very soul changes color. Neuroscientists would translate this into neuroplasticity. The more often you ruminate on the narcissist's games, the stronger those destructive pathways become. You are literally wiring your brain for exhaustion, for hypervigilance, for dependence. So the hidden cost isn't just the hours you lose arguing, the nights you can't sleep, or the joy that evaporates from your hobbies. It is the cumulative theft of your mental architecture. Jung called it possession by an archetype, the moment when instead of living your own story, you start living inside someone else's drama. And research backs this up. According to Dr. Kristen Neff, one of the leading researchers on self-compassion, people who remain trapped in toxic relationships show higher cortisol levels for up to 48 hours after a conflict. Imagine that, 2 days of stress hormones flooding your system from a single argument. Multiply that by months or years, and you begin to see why depression, anxiety, and even autoimmune diseases become common outcomes. But why do we allow it? Because part of us is convinced that giving energy away buys us safety, approval, or love. Jung believed that the shadow side of the human psyche seeks out these relationships unconsciously, drawn to the familiar wound. Neuroscience again confirms this. Our dopamine systems reward even negative attention if it is intermittent. That's why narcissists thrive on giving you small doses of praise mixed with criticism. It creates the same addictive loop seen in gamblers at slot machines. If you are listening right now, you might already recognize yourself in these patterns. You give, and yet you walk away feeling smaller. The hidden cost is not obvious, but it is measurable, it is biological, it is spiritual. Seneca would tell you that you are spending your most valuable currency, time and inner peace, on someone else's endless appetite. Jung would tell you that you are abandoning yourself to live inside another's shadow. Neuroscience would tell you that you are burning neural fuel that will take days to replenish. And here is the paradox. The very moment you realize these leaks are happening is also the moment you can reclaim authority over them. Your brain is plastic, it can rewire. Your psyche is resilient, it can rediscover itself. The Stoics insisted that nothing external can touch the soul without your consent. And modern psychology agrees. The act of naming the pattern is the first step toward dismantling it. So if you felt drained, restless, or hollow after encounters with a narcissist, know this. The cost is real, it is profound, but it is not permanent. Awareness is the key that stops the leak. Once you see how your attention, your cortisol, your very neural architecture are being hijacked, you can begin to guard them as fiercely as Marcus Aurelius guarded his inner citadel. And in that act of defense, you will find the first taste of freedom. Sigmund Freud once said that we are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love. And Carl Jung warned that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when that reaction is toxic, when instead of being transformed into something higher, you are reduced, fragmented, and drained? This is the precise mechanism of the narcissist's web. Subtle, invisible strings that tie themselves around your energy until you can't tell where you end and they begin. Psychologists estimate that around 1 in 20 people meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, but far more exhibit narcissistic traits without fitting the full diagnosis. That means most of us will encounter them, not just in romantic relationships, but at work, in families, even in friendships. And the danger is not the obvious grandiosity or arrogance we associate with narcissists. The danger is the small, precise manipulations that bypass your rational mind and target your nervous system. Research in neuroscience has shown that the human brain is wired with what are called mirror neurons, cells that activate when we observe the emotions of others. This is why you feel anxious around someone who constantly radiates tension, or why you feel guilty when someone subtly communicates disappointment. Narcissists exploit this biological reality. They use guilt-tripping, silent treatment, or exaggerated disappointment not as random behavior, but as hooks. Each hook forces your mirror neurons to fire, pulling you into an emotional state that doesn't even belong to you. Marcus Aurelius would have recognized this tactic in another language. He wrote, "If someone does wrong, it is because he does not know better." But the Stoics also warned us never to let another person's ignorance contaminate the soul. The narcissist's web works precisely because it confuses that boundary. You begin to feel responsible for their moods, accountable for their happiness, guilty for their suffering. Seneca described this as living in servitude while believing yourself free. And modern data confirms it. A study from the University of Georgia found that people in relationships with highly narcissistic partners experienced a 35% increase in codependent behaviors within the first year. You might ask yourself, why didn't I see it? Because the web is not built with obvious chains, but with threads of manipulation so fine that they look like care. One moment it's flattery, the next it's criticism. One day they tell you that you are the best thing in their life, and the next they suggest you are a burden. This oscillation creates what behavioral psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive form of conditioning ever discovered. The same principle keeps people glued to slot machines in Las Vegas, hoping that after one more pull, the jackpot will appear. Freud described this loop as repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to repeat painful dynamics in the hope of mastering them. Jung took it further, saying that what we fail to make conscious returns as fate. In practice, this means that until you recognize the narcissist's subtle strategies, gaslighting, blame-shifting, emotional blackmail, you are destined to replay them, believing each time that this time you can fix it. But the truth is, the more you try to fix it, the deeper the web pulls you in. Consider gaslighting. This is not just lying, it is the deliberate rewriting of your memory. You recall an argument one way, they insist it never happened. You bring up a promise, they say you imagined it. Over time, your brain's confidence in its own perception deteriorates. Neuroscientists call this cognitive dissonance fatigue, the mental exhaustion that comes from holding two conflicting versions of reality. In one study from Stockholm University, victims of chronic gaslighting showed a 40% decline in self-reported trust in their own judgment. Imagine what it means to walk through life doubting your own eyes, your own mind. That is the web. But perhaps the most insidious manipulation is the silent one, withdrawal of affection. Human beings are wired to fear abandonment more than physical harm. Evolutionary psychology shows that being excluded from the tribe was once a death sentence. Narcissists exploit this primal fear. A single night of silence, a withheld glance, a delayed reply, your nervous system interprets it as mortal danger. Your cortisol spikes, your adrenaline pumps, and suddenly you are begging for reconciliation, not because you are wrong, but because your biology has been hijacked. If you feel this now, know that you are not weak. You are human. Your brain is responding exactly as designed. The narcissist simply knows how to press the buttons that evolution placed there. Jung would say you are caught in an archetypal trap. The rescuer, the fixer, the one who sacrifices themselves to redeem the wounded other. But as long as you remain inside that myth, you will keep losing pieces of your energy, your time, yourself. Recognizing the web is the first step. See the threads for what they are. Not love, not loyalty, not destiny, but tactics. Once you can name them, they begin to lose their power. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Awareness changes the estimate. And once the estimate shifts, the web starts to break. Carl Jung once wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When we ask why we are drawn again and again to narcissistic personalities, why we tolerate their games even when we know they harm us, the answer lies not in weakness, but in the shadow, the hidden part of ourselves that mirrors what we most avoid. Freud believed that we repeat relationships not because we enjoy pain, but because we are trying unconsciously to resolve an old wound. Jung took this further, insisting that every attraction has a symbolic meaning. The narcissist we are drawn to often reflects the unhealed parts of our psyche, the neglected child, the part desperate for validation. Numbers reveal how widespread this pattern is. Surveys from the National Institute of Mental Health show that 60% of people who exit a toxic relationship end up in a similar one within 5 years. This is not coincidence. It is psychological repetition, what Freud called repetition compulsion. And if you listen carefully to your own story, you may already notice the echoes. The same arguments, the same promises, the same disappointments. It feels like déjà vu because at the level of the unconscious, it is. The Stoics warned us about this long before modern psychology. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by events, but by the judgments we attach to them. When you believe deep down that you must prove your worth, you become fertile ground for narcissists. They sense it. They amplify it. They reflect back to you the insecurity you carry. And suddenly you are trapped in a mirror game. You think you are fighting them, but in reality, you are fighting yourself. Neuroscience provides the biological counterpart to Jung's shadow. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, becomes hypersensitive when we are exposed to inconsistent care. Children raised with unpredictable love often show higher baseline stress hormones as adults. Narcissists unconsciously replicate this inconsistency. Praise mixed with criticism, affection followed by withdrawal. Your brain, conditioned to seek resolution, becomes hooked on solving them, hoping each time for stability. But what you are really chasing is the comfort you never fully received. Jung described this as projection. We project the unlived parts of our soul onto others. If you secretly doubt your value, you are magnetized to those who confirm it by withholding approval. If you have buried anger, you find yourself with someone who provokes it constantly. Freud called this the return of the repressed. In both cases, the narcissist acts as a mirror, forcing you to confront what you would rather avoid. This is why leaving them feels so impossible. It means facing yourself. And yet, within this painful dynamic lies opportunity. Jung believed that every projection is a chance for integration. The narcissist becomes the unwelcome teacher, showing you where your wounds lie. Neuroscience agrees. Studies on trauma healing show that when people engage in self-reflection and therapy after toxic relationships, they often experience increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for self-regulation and clarity. In other words, by confronting the shadow, You literally strengthen the part of your brain that allows you to break the cycle. But here is the tension. As long as you remain unaware, the mirror is a trap. You give your energy to the narcissist because you believe they hold the missing piece of your soul. Jung would argue that they only reflect what you must reclaim within yourself. Marcus Aurelius would put it simply: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The mirror shows you that the battle is never about changing them. It is about recovering yourself. Perhaps you've asked, why do I stay? Why do I keep giving second chances? The answer is not just fear of being alone. It is the unconscious hope that this time, by giving more energy, you will finally receive the love you crave. But each time, the mirror only throws your longing back at you. Recognizing this pattern is not about blame. It is about liberation. Once you see that the narcissist is not the source of healing, but the catalyst to reveal what you must heal within, the cycle begins to dissolve. Carl Jung compared individuation, the process of becoming whole, to alchemy. The lead of your suffering can be transformed into the gold of self-awareness. But only if you stop mistaking the mirror for reality. Freud showed us the wound. Jung showed us the mirror. The Stoics gave us the discipline to step back from the reflection and reclaim the citadel of the mind. The science of today confirms what they intuited centuries ago. When you break the projection, when you integrate the shadow, you stop bleeding energy into someone else's game. You begin to live your own story again. Why do intelligent, strong, even successful people keep giving in to the same emotional traps? Why do we return to the narcissist's orbit even after promising ourselves we won't? Marcus Aurelius would say it is because we confuse what is within our control with what is not. We believe, against all evidence, that if we just give more, explain more, love more, the other person will change. Seneca warned, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And neuroscience now proves what the Stoics sensed. When you attach emotionally to someone unpredictable, your brain creates loops that are almost impossible to break without awareness. Behavioral psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. One day you receive affection, the next day rejection. This rhythm lights up the brain's reward system in the same way a gambler becomes addicted to a slot machine. You are not addicted to the narcissist themselves. You are addicted to the hope of their approval. Studies from Cambridge University show that when affection is given unpredictably, dopamine spikes are 400% higher than when it is given consistently. This is why one compliment after a week of criticism feels like salvation. The brain registers it as a jackpot, and so you return again and again despite the cost. Epictetus would call this slavery of the soul. He said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." What he meant is that freedom comes not from chasing validation, but from detaching from the opinions of others. But our biology resists this wisdom. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, interprets rejection as danger. Cortisol floods the system, your heartbeat accelerates, your body prepares as though survival is at stake. This is why walking away feels like death even when your rational mind knows it is the only path. Freud observed that people repeat toxic bonds because they are unconsciously trying to resolve the original wound, often from childhood. If love once came with conditions, if affection was tied to performance, the psyche seeks out similar dynamics in adulthood, hoping finally to win the prize. Jung called this the complex, an emotional knot that pulls us into familiar patterns without our consent. The narcissist becomes the perfect trigger. They embody both the promise and the withholding, and so the cycle repeats. But here lies a crucial truth. The Stoics remind us that attachment is not love if it enslaves. Love strengthens the soul, attachment drains it. Neuroscience echoes this with hard numbers. People in emotionally abusive relationships report twice the rate of anxiety disorders and 3 times the rate of major depression compared to those in stable bonds. The cost is not only emotional, it is physiological, hormonal, neurological. Each time you give in, you teach your brain that survival depends on the narcissist's approval. And slowly, your identity erodes. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." This sentence holds the key. You cannot control whether a narcissist criticizes you or withdraws affection, but you can control your interpretation. Instead of seeing silence as proof that you are unworthy, you can learn to see it as evidence of their limitation. Instead of believing criticism means you are broken, you can train your mind to recognize it as manipulation. This shift, small but consistent, begins to rewire the brain. Neuroscientific research shows that cognitive reframing, the act of consciously reinterpreting an event, reduces amygdala activity and strengthens prefrontal control. In practice, this means that each time you catch yourself thinking, "I must have done something wrong," and instead tell yourself, "This silence is their tactic, not my fault," you are literally reshaping your neural circuits. This is where philosophy and biology meet. The Stoics called it training the mind. Scientists call it neuroplasticity. So why do we keep giving in? Because our biology is wired for connection, our psychology repeats old wounds, and our society confuses attachment with love. But understanding this is the beginning of freedom. Seneca said that true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future. Applied here, it means you can step out of the trap by realizing you do not need their unpredictable approval to validate your worth. Jung would add, "The shadow loses its grip the moment you shine light on it." Freud would agree, once the unconscious pattern is made conscious, it no longer controls you. If you feel trapped right now, torn between staying and leaving, understand this. The pull you feel is not love, it is conditioning. It is not destiny, it is neurochemistry. And just as your brain learned to crave the narcissist's crumbs, it can unlearn. The Stoics give us the lens, modern psychology gives us the method, neuroscience gives us the proof. What was once an invisible prison can become the training ground for resilience. The same trap that drained you can, if faced with awareness, become the very place where you reclaim your freedom. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires a confrontation with what enslaves us. If the narcissist's web has trapped you, then reclaiming the self begins when you stop asking, "How do I fix them?" and start asking, "How do I protect and rebuild me?" Seneca wrote that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. The adversity you face now is not the narcissist's cruelty itself, but the erosion of your own boundaries, the slow draining of your essence. To reclaim yourself is to draw those boundaries back, to remember what is yours, and to guard it like a citadel. Modern psychology gives us concrete proof that recovery is possible. Dr. Judith Herman, a pioneer in trauma studies, found that survivors of long-term psychological abuse who engaged in structured self-care routines, daily journaling, therapy, exercise, showed up to a 60% reduction in PTSD symptoms within 1 year. These aren't abstract numbers. They show that reclaiming the self is not a poetic idea, but a measurable transformation. Your body recalibrates. Your brain heals. Your identity strengthens. One of the most powerful strategies is self-validation. Narcissists thrive on controlling your sense of worth, so taking it back means learning to affirm your own reality. Freud believed that unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. Journaling, speaking your truth aloud, or even recording your own voice confirming what you experience breaks the spell of gaslighting. Neuroscience shows that when you verbalize emotions, activity in the amygdala decreases while the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, gains strength. In other words, naming your reality restores your power. Boundaries, too, are not optional. Epictetus advised, keep your attention focused entirely on what is truly your own concern. That means learning to say no without apology, to disengage from conversations designed to provoke, and to refuse the silent wars that narcissists engineer. Case studies show that individuals who implemented strict boundaries, limited contact, controlled communication, removal from conflict cycles, reported a 70% increase in perceived personal freedom within 6 months. The data is clear. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are medicine. But recovery is not only defense. It is also rediscovery. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Many survivors of narcissistic entanglement report that they lost hobbies, friendships, and ambitions while orbiting the narcissist's demands. Reclaiming the self means reigniting those sparks. Neuroscientific research on neuroplasticity proves that engaging in new skills, learning an instrument, practicing meditation, creating art, literally grows new synaptic connections. One study from Harvard found that participants who practiced mindfulness meditation for 8 weeks showed increased gray matter density in regions associated with self-awareness and compassion. This is not philosophy, it is biology. By turning inward, you rewire. Consider the story of Eleanor Roosevelt, who lived much of her early life overshadowed by a critical mother and a domineering husband. She later said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Her transformation from a timid woman into one of the most influential voices of the 20th century exemplifies reclamation. She built her own identity not by waiting for others to affirm her, but by creating a life of action, service, and vision. Your story, though different in detail, holds the same potential. Support systems are another pillar. Freud spoke of the talking cure. Jung believed in the healing power of relationship, and Seneca emphasized the wisdom of surrounding yourself with virtuous companions. Data today confirms this. Survivors of narcissistic abuse who engaged in supportive communities, whether therapy groups, trusted friendships, or online survivor networks, showed a 40% faster recovery rate than those who tried to heal alone. Healing is not isolation. Healing is connection with those who mirror back your worth instead of draining it. The Stoics would remind us that freedom is an internal stance. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Every strategy, self-validation, boundaries, rediscovery, support, funnels back to this truth. You cannot control the narcissist. You cannot rewrite their games. But you can reclaim the sovereignty of your mind, your time, your energy. Reclaiming the self is not a single act, but a daily practice. Each time you affirm your worth, set a boundary, reignite a passion, or lean on supportive allies, you take back territory that was stolen. Neuroscience shows that consistency is key. Small, repeated actions reshape the brain more than grand gestures. The same persistence that once kept you trapped can now set you free. Jung would call this the alchemy of transformation, turning the lead of suffering into the gold of selfhood. Seneca would call it fortitude. Freud would call it integration. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity. Whatever the name, the message is the same. You are not condemned to remain drained. With awareness and deliberate practice, the energy once stolen from you can be reclaimed, rebuilt, and redirected into a life that is truly yours. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, political intrigue, and the constant pressure of ruling an empire. Yet in his private notes, later collected as meditations, he wrote, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting." What he meant was simple. The very thing meant to break, you can become the material that builds your armor. When you are entangled with a narcissist, the goal is not only to escape, but to emerge with a resilience so deep that you become unshakable. Neuroscience now shows us how. Resilience is not the absence of wounds. It is the body and mind's ability to repair after damage. Studies from the University of Pennsylvania found that individuals who practiced daily resilience-building exercises, gratitude journaling, reframing, controlled breathing, experienced a 30% reduction in stress hormones and a 25% increase in reported well-being within 3 months. These numbers tell us something crucial. Resilience is not an abstract trait you either have or don't have. It is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows with use. Stoicism has always been about training that muscle. Epictetus, born a slave, endured years of cruelty, yet taught that no man could enslave his mind. He urged his students to rehearse adversity in their imagination, so that when hardship struck, they were already prepared. Modern psychology calls this stress inoculation. Controlled exposure to difficulty, whether through cold showers, fasting, or disciplined routines, conditions the nervous system to remain calm under pressure. In other words, you don't wait for the storm to build armor. You build it daily, so the storm cannot destroy you. Neuroscience explains why this works. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and emotional regulation, weakens under constant stress. But mindfulness, journaling, and reframing exercises strengthen its activity, restoring control over the amygdala, the brain's fear center. A Harvard study showed that just 8 weeks of mindfulness practice resulted in increased density in brain regions linked to self-control and empathy. So when Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he was anticipating findings that MRI scans would prove 2 millennia later. But mental armor is not only about training the mind, it is about protecting the boundaries of the soul. Narcissists thrive on access to your emotions, your time, your energy. Building armor means limiting that access. Clinical case studies show that victims of psychological abuse who implemented low-contact or no-contact strategies experienced a 70% improvement in emotional stability after 6 months. Armor, then, is not detachment from life, but selective detachment from what drains you. Consider the example of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote, Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude. Frankl's insight is echoed by both Stoic philosophy and modern neuroscience. The ultimate armor is not what you block, but what you choose to focus on. Resilient people do not deny suffering. They redirect energy into meaning, growth, and contribution. Seneca taught that adversity reveals a person's true nature. He compared the soul to a warrior sharpened by battle. Today, positive psychology echoes this. Post-traumatic growth is a documented phenomenon, where individuals who endure toxic or abusive relationships often emerge with greater empathy, clarity, and strength. Studies indicate that over 50% of people who survive severe psychological adversity report increased resilience and a deeper sense of purpose afterward. The wound becomes the place of strength. But resilience is not passive endurance. It is active transformation. Jung believed that the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. This means that your armor will not look like anyone else's. For some, it may be spirituality; for others, physical training; for others, creative expression. Neuroscience confirms that personalized resilience strategies, tailored to your strengths, activate the brain's reward system more effectively, reinforcing consistency. Armor is not one size fits all. It is forged in the fire of your own story. If you feel broken, understand this. The cracks you carry are not weaknesses but entry points for light. Marcus Aurelius would tell you that obstacles are fuel. Epictetus would remind you that slavery of the body does not mean slavery of the soul. Neuroscience would show you brain scans proving that practice rewires trauma into strength. And Frankl would whisper from his suffering, "The last freedom is always yours." Mental armor is not about becoming cold, untouchable, or numb. It is about becoming so rooted in your own center that manipulation cannot shake you. It is about knowing who you are so fully that even the narcissist's silence, their criticism, their withdrawal finds no target. They shoot arrows, but you have learned to stand in a place they cannot reach. That is the essence of resilience. That is the armor forged in adversity, tempered by wisdom, and proven by science. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." These words carry a particular weight when we speak of surviving narcissistic entanglement. Because the truth is, the story does not end with leaving, nor with setting boundaries, nor even with building resilience. The story only finds its true conclusion when the pain itself becomes fuel, when the energy that was once drained becomes the energy that propels you into freedom, into meaning, into an identity no one can touch. This is the transformation that lies beyond the narcissist. Numbers tell us this transformation is real. Research from the Journal of Traumatic Stress reveals that 53% of people who survive long-term psychological abuse report experiencing post-traumatic growth, a deeper sense of purpose, stronger relationships, and a sharpened clarity about their values. In other words, while the narcissist's presence fractures the self, their absence becomes an opening for rebirth. Seneca foresaw this paradox when he wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor strengthens the body. What tried to destroy you can instead define you, if you allow it." Marcus Aurelius, faced with betrayal and endless challenges, insisted that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Neuroscience now confirms that this is more than philosophy. When survivors engage in deliberate practices of self-discovery, therapy, creativity, community, they show increased activation in the brain's reward circuitry and heightened resilience markers. The very circuits once hijacked by manipulation become the foundation of renewal. Pain, when reframed and integrated, changes the architecture of the mind. But how does this transformation unfold? First, by reclaiming authorship of your story. Freud argued that being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. Jung added that facing the shadow is the path to individuation. Survivors who step beyond the narcissist stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and start asking, "What does this reveal about me, about what I need to heal, about what I can build?" This shift turns passive suffering into active growth. Second, by finding meaning in what was endured. Viktor Frankl, who survived the camps, discovered that those who found meaning in their suffering, however small, were the ones most likely to survive. He wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." Survivors of narcissistic abuse often emerge with a newfound mission: to create, to help others, to live with radical authenticity. Neuroscience supports this. People who link trauma recovery with a greater sense of purpose show 40% faster improvements in mental health outcomes than those who focus only on symptom reduction. Third, by transmuting pain into creativity. Jung called this process alchemy, the transformation of lead into gold. Many of history's great works were born from suffering. Consider Frida Kahlo, whose art emerged from physical and emotional torment, yet became a symbol of resilience worldwide. The energy once consumed by the narcissist can be redirected into art, writing, innovation, or service. Each act of creation is a declaration. You did not drain me, you fueled me. The Stoics would call this the highest freedom, to be untouchable not because the world is kind, but because you have mastered your response. Epictetus, once a slave, insisted, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom is not merely cutting ties with toxic people. It is discovering that even in their presence, they cannot dictate your inner world. That is inner sovereignty. And perhaps most importantly, transformation beyond the narcissist means learning to love again, not recklessly but wisely. Studies in positive psychology show that survivors who engage in healthy, supportive relationships after toxic ones report higher levels of life satisfaction than the general population. Why? Because they know the value of authenticity. They can spot manipulation early. They do not confuse attachment with love. They love with clarity, not desperation. This is the reward of transformation. You don't just survive, you become wiser in the art of connection. So if you are listening now, and you feel that the narcissist has taken too much from you, your time, your energy, your trust, know this: what they stole can be rebuilt, but stronger, sharper, freer. Jung would remind you that your true self waits beneath the shadow. Marcus Aurelius would remind you that obstacles are fuel. Seneca would remind you that adversity is a teacher. And neuroscience would prove that your brain, your body, your soul are designed to heal, to grow, to transform. The narcissist is not the end of your story. They are a chapter. Pain is not the conclusion. It is the opening to a deeper narrative, one where you stand no longer as a victim, but as an alchemist, turning the poison into medicine, the wound into wisdom, the loss into a new birth. And when that transformation is complete, when you carry your scars not as shame, but as proof of your survival, you will realize something extraordinary. They never truly owned your energy. You did. And now, finally, you are free to direct it where it was always meant to go, into the creation of a life that is fully, unmistakably yours.